NBC's justice correspondent Pete Williams is at the Supreme Court, and he has the latest. And Pete, going through these reports, it seems there is sort of an attack line against DOMA from a states' rights perspective and a gay rights perspective from some of the justices.
Right, and this is a very different day than yesterday, where the justices seemed not to be willing to engage in the issue, looking for ways to diminish the size of the Prop 8 case and limit it just to California. Very different here. The justices do seem to be willing to get to the heart of the matter here on the question of whether DOMA is constitutional on two bases. One is whether the federal government has the right to do this, given the fact that Congress and the federal government have traditionally deferred to the states on the issue of who is married and who's not. And secondly, even if the government did have the power, whether it's unconstitutional discrimination. All of the court's liberals spoke out strongly against the law. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that federal recognition and federal benefits are so pervasive in a married couple's life that without this recognition, you have what she called a skim milk marriage. Justice Elena Kagan quoted from the House report when DOMA was passed, quoted from passages that actually produced an audible gasp in the courtroom when she quoted some of the language expressing moral disapproval for same-sex couples. And Stephen Breyer said, would it make sense for Congress to say, well, you know, we're not going to recognize marriages of somebody who doesn't have the right level of residency or somebody who isn't the right age. In other words, he said there's clearly something different about making a difference here from refusing to recognize marriage based on sexual orientation. That leaves the key vote here to be Justice Kennedy, and he seemed to be very concerned about a couple of aspects of this, about the fact that it's not narrowly focused. It's not just based on specifically federal interests like taxes. He says it covers 1,100 different benefits and programs in the federal government, and he says the government really isn't being neutral here. It's putting its thumb on a scale. It's even saying that couples in states that do allow same-sex marriage, they can't get federal benefits either. So he seemed to think that it goes beyond the federal government's power. Anyway you count it, I think you get to at least 5 votes willing to say that DOMA is unconstitutional. Now, I have to say the court did spend almost an hour talking about whether they have the authority to hear this case, whether the parties are properly here. And put very simply, Luke, the issue is this. Normally, if you lose a case in the lower court, you can appeal, but if you win, you can't. The federal government won in the appeals court here. They agree it's unconstitutional. That's what the appeals court said. So there's some question here about whether they have the right to be here. But for technical reasons, I think the court's going to say they do and probably will get to the heart of this case. So if I had to predict today, based simply on the oral argument, I'd say that they're going to strike DOMA down.
And Pete, real quickly, I understand from Justice Roberts there are some questions as to why the House GOP was actually the people taking up this case. It was not the Justice Department. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, look, there have been a number of conservatives who said it's not proper for the Justice Department to decline to defend a federal law because that's normally the Justice Department's job. What the government is saying here is that there's a big exception to that rule, and that's if the president decides that a law is unconstitutional. Then they say the tradition has always been that the Justice Department won't defend the law, and that's why the House Republicans decided they should pick up.
Pete Williams, live from the Supreme Court. We thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.